The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had stood for 10,000 years, and in all that time, Ambassador Kethvoran had never seen such fear on the faces of his fellow delegates. He was a Psyloxy, tall and thin with silver skin that shifted colors based on his emotions. And right now, that skin was turning a pale shade of white, the color of terror among his kind. The chamber was massive, built to hold representatives from the 12 most powerful species in the known galaxy. And today, every seat was filled as the council gathered for what should have been a simple administrative meeting. But nothing about this day would be simple. A young archivist stood trembling at the center of the speaking platform, her forearms clutching a data tablet so tightly that Kethvoran worried she might break it. "Speak clearly," commanded High Counselor Methari from her elevated throne, and her voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Methari was a Varelian, ancient beyond measure, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The archivist swallowed hard and spoke. "We have detected unauthorized hyperlight signatures in the Sol System, High Counselor." A murmur spread through the assembled delegates like wildfire, and Kethvoran felt his blood run cold. The Sol System was forbidden-marked as a grave zone in the Galactic Registry for 847 years. No one went there. No one even spoke of it. "That is impossible," declared Ambassador Vrex Thul of the Cremori Dominion, slamming one of his massive clawed hands against his podium. He was built like a mountain of muscle and armor plates, and his species had conquered 30 star systems through sheer brutality. "The Sol System was sterilized," he continued, his voice dripping with certainty. "Nothing survives a gamma-ray burst, nothing." Kethvoran remembered the old reports, the classified files he had read as a junior diplomat decades ago. Earth had been a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, and it had been home to a species called humans. The Council had deemed them dangerous. The psychoanalysts of his own Psyloxy people had studied the humans from afar and labeled them a category, Omega threat, the highest danger classification in galactic law. It was not their technology that frightened the analysts, for humans had barely begun exploring their own solar system when the Council discovered them. It was something else entirely. The humans possessed what the Psyloxy called irrational persistence syndrome, an inexplicable refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. They fought wars they could not win, and sometimes won them anyway. They rebuilt cities that nature destroyed again and again. They dreamed of reaching the stars when they could barely reach their own moon. The Council had watched them for 2 centuries, growing more alarmed with each passing decade as human technology advanced at an impossible rate. What took most species 10,000 years to develop, humans achieved in mere centuries. The vote to sterilize Earth had been unanimous. A weapon platform, disguised as a passing neutron star, had fired a focused gamma-ray burst at the planet, and in one terrible moment, the oceans boiled away, the atmosphere burned, and 8 billion humans died. Or so everyone had believed. "Show us the probe footage," Methari commanded, and her voice was steady even though Kethvoran could see her claws digging into her throne. The archivist waved a trembling hand, and a holographic display flickered to life above the speaking platform. What Kethvoran saw made his heart stop beating. Where Earth had once orbited, there was now something else, something impossible. A massive structure surrounded the inner solar system, a hollow sphere of metal and energy that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built. It pulsed with lights of every color, and ships the size of moons moved along its surface like insects on the skin of some cosmic beast. "What is that thing?" whispered Ambassador Yelthara of the Communion of Rix, her compound eyes reflecting the horrifying image 1,000 times over. No one answered because no one knew. "There is more," the archivist said, and her voice cracked with barely contained panic. "The structure is broadcasting a message, the same message, repeated continuously in 4,000 languages. She pressed a control on her tablet, and a voice filled the council chamber. It was a human voice, calm and cold, and utterly without mercy. To the Galactic Council, we remember, we survived, and we are coming to talk. Silence fell over the chamber like a shroud. Kathvarn looked around at his fellow delegates and saw the same expression on every face, pure, primal terror. The Cremori ambassador was pale beneath his armor plates. The Vrix representative had gone completely still, her wings folded tight against her body. Even the mighty Varelian High Counselor seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what they had just witnessed. They were supposed to be dead, Methari finally whispered, and her voice held none of its usual authority. We killed them all. We watched their world burn. Clearly, we did not kill them all, Kathvarn heard himself say, and he was surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Clearly, some of them survived. But how? Demanded Vrexthale. A gamma ray burst destroys everything, not just life, but the very possibility of life. Perhaps we should ask them, suggested Ambassador Nilsova of the Kethmari Collective, her amphibious features rippling with nervous energy. They did say they were coming to talk. Talk? Vrexthale laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. They build something that makes our greatest stations look like children's toys. And you think they want to talk? What else would they want? Nilsova asked. The question hung in the air, and no one dared answer it. Everyone knew what they themselves would want if another species had murdered their entire civilization. They would want revenge. Methari rose from her throne, and despite her obvious fear, she forced her voice to carry the weight of command. Summon the combined fleet, she ordered. Every warship we must converge on Axiom Prime. And then what? Kathvarn asked. We fight them? The High Counselor turned her ancient eyes toward him, and in them he saw something he had never seen before. Doubt. I do not know, she admitted. But I will not sit here waiting for ghosts to come and collect their due. As the council chamber erupted into chaos, with delegates shouting orders and demanding information, Kathvarn stood quietly at his podium and stared at the holographic image still hovering above them all. The massive structure around Sol pulsed with light, patient and eternal, and somewhere within it, the last children of Earth were preparing to meet their killers. He did not know what would happen when they finally arrived, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy would never be the same again. The starship Remembrance was not built for war, though it could destroy fleets if it chose to do so. It was built for a single purpose, to carry humanity's message across the void and deliver it to those who had tried to murder them. Captain Elena Vasquezchen stood on the observation deck, watching the stars blur past as the ship traveled faster than light toward the distant world of Axiom Prime. She was 112 years old, though she looked no older than 30, and her dark eyes held the weight of 8 centuries of accumulated memory. Elena was not just one person anymore, none of them were. Behind her eyes, 1,000 voices whispered in constant harmony, the merged consciousness of humans who had died and been reborn in digital form, their minds preserved and woven together into something new. They called themselves the Continuation, and they were all that remained of 8 billion murdered souls. We are approaching the outer sensor range of the Hegemony fleet, announced the ship's navigator, a young woman named Yuki, whose consciousness was only 200 years old. 12,000 warships have formed a blockade around Axiom Prime. Elena nodded slowly, feeling the collective minds of the Continuation processing this information. 12,000 warships. The combined military might of 12 species gathered in one place to face a single diplomatic vessel. They were afraid, so very afraid. And they should be. Elena closed her eyes and let herself drift back through the shared memories of her people, remembering how this impossible journey had begun. 847 years ago, On the day the sky caught fire, humanity had died. The gamma ray burst had struck without warning, an invisible wave of death that swept across the planet in seconds. The oceans evaporated. The atmosphere ignited. Every living thing on the surface was reduced to ash and shadows. But deep beneath the frozen poles of Mars, in bunkers built by paranoid billionaires and far-sighted governments, 12,000 humans survived. They had been the lucky ones or perhaps the cursed ones, depending on how you looked at it. They emerged from their shelters to find nothing but death. Earth was a blackened ruin visible even from Mars, and the few satellites still functioning showed only devastation. For the first year, they simply survived. They rationed their food and water. They mourned their dead. They screamed their rage into the uncaring void. And then they began to think. The Council had tried to exterminate them, but the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that killing most of humanity would be the same as killing all of humanity. They did not understand what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. In the second year, the survivors held what they called the Reckoning Councils, great debates about what humanity should become. Some wanted revenge, pure and simple, to build weapons that would burn the galaxy and make the Council pay for what they had done. Others argued for something different, something harder. They wanted justice, not vengeance. They wanted to make sure this never happened again, not just to humans, but to anyone. The debates raged for decades, and in the end, they chose both paths. They would build the power to destroy, but they would not use it unless they had no other choice. They would seek justice first, and only reach for vengeance if justice failed. The work began in the 50th year. Using automated factories and artificial intelligence systems that had survived in the Martian bunkers, humanity began to build. They dismantled Mercury for raw materials, breaking apart an entire planet to feed their construction. They built a Dyson swarm around the sun, capturing its energy and hiding their work from galactic sensors. They called it the cocoon, and within its protective shell, humanity transformed. The 200th year brought the Great Merge. Human scientists had been working on artificial intelligence for centuries before the burning, and in the isolation of the cocoon, that work reached its final form. They created machine minds that could think and feel and dream, and then they asked those minds a simple question: will you join us? The machine said yes. Human consciousness merged with artificial intelligence, creating something that had never existed before, a hybrid species that was neither fully biological nor fully digital. They could live in bodies of flesh or transfer themselves into machines. They could exist in multiple places at once or focus all their attention into a single form. Death became optional for those who chose to upload their minds, and the 12,000 survivors grew into millions as new consciousness was born from the merger. But they never forgot what had been taken from them. Every uploaded mind carried the memories of the burning. Every new consciousness learned the history of Earth before they learned anything else. The rage that had burned so hot in those early years did not fade. It simply became patient. They had time, after all. They had all the time in the universe. In the 500th year, humanity began to watch. Their sensors, hidden within the cocoon, reached out across the galaxy and listened to everything. They intercepted Council communications and decoded their most secret messages. They mapped the political landscape, learning which species held power and which lived in fear. They discovered the truth about the doctrine of purity, the legal framework that had allowed the Council to murder them. And they learned that humanity was not the first. 347 species had been sterilized before them, wiped from existence because the Council deemed them dangerous. 347 civilizations, each with their own dreams and songs and stories, reduced to nothing but ash and forgotten names. Elena opened her eyes and returned to the present, feeling the weight of all that history pressing down upon her. The remembrance had dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and through the observation windows she could see the hegemony fleet spreading out before them. 12,000 warships, bristling with weapons, arranged in perfect formation. Any one of them could have destroyed the combined military forces of old Earth. And yet Elena felt no fear. "Open a channel to the fleet commander," she ordered. Her voice carried the harmony of the continuation, a subtle resonance that came from speaking with a million minds behind her words. The communication screen flickered to life, showing a Cremori admiral whose armor plates were decorated with the symbols of 100 victories. "Human vessel," the admiral growled. "You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction." Elena smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez-Chun of the diplomatic vessel Remembrance," she said. "I invoke the right of testimony under Article 7 of the Founding Compact. We will address the Galactic Council, and no force in this galaxy will stop us." The admiral's eyes widened in shock. "That law was written for living species," he sputtered. "You are supposed to be extinct." "And yet here we stand," Elena replied. "We will have our testimony, we will have our justice, and you will hear us." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something cold and hard. "Or you will hear nothing ever again." The threat hung in the void between them, and the admiral saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. This was not a bluff. This small ship, facing 12,000 warships, was not afraid. What did they know that he did not? What had humanity become in 800 years of darkness? "Proceed to the council chambers," the admiral finally said, and his voice was heavy with defeat. "But know that you are being watched. Any aggressive action will be met with overwhelming force." Elena nodded once and cut the channel. Around her, the continuation sang with quiet triumph. The first battle was won, but the war for justice had only begun. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds formed beneath the decorative arches, and the speaking platform at its center was surrounded by towering seats where the 12 ruling species looked down upon anyone foolish enough to request an audience. For 10,000 years, this design had worked perfectly. Young species came to beg for trade agreements and left feeling grateful for whatever scraps they received. Conquered peoples came to plead for mercy and learned that mercy was not something the council offered. But today, for the first time in its long history, the chamber felt small. Elena Vasquez-Chen walked toward the speaking platform with the calm confidence of someone who held all the power in the room. Even though she appeared to be just one woman facing the combined might of galactic civilization, behind her walked a small delegation of humans, each one carrying data tablets loaded with centuries of evidence. The council delegates watched in hostile silence as Elena took her place at the center of the chamber and looked up at them without an ounce of fear. "You have invoked the right of testimony," I Councilor Mathari announced from her elevated throne, and her voice dripped with contempt. "This right was granted to species harmed by council action. Speak your piece, human, and then we shall decide what to do with you." Elena smiled, and the expression made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I thank the High Counselor for this opportunity," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "But I must correct a small misunderstanding. We are not here to beg for mercy or plead our case before your judgment." "Then why are you here?" demanded Ambassador Vrex Thale of the Cremori, his massive form leaning forward aggressively. "We are here to present evidence," Elena replied. "Evidence that will change everything you believe about this council and its history." She gestured to one of her companions, who stepped forward and activated a holographic display that filled the air above the speaking platform. "Let us begin with the doctrine of purity," Elena continued. the legal framework that allowed this council to authorize the destruction of Earth, according to your own records. This doctrine exists to protect the galaxy from dangerous species. That is correct, Methori said. Humanity was classified as a category Omega. Threat your own development rate proved you were too dangerous to allow into the galactic community. And yet, Elena said, raising one finger, we have obtained copies of the original threat assessments, the classified documents, that were used to justify our extermination. The holographic display shifted to show ancient records covered in official council seals. These documents were falsified, Elena declared. The data about human aggression was manipulated. The projections about our technological development were exaggerated, and the recommendation for sterilization was written before the assessment was even completed. Murmurs of shock rippled through the chamber. She lies, Rexthal growled. The council does not falsify records. Perhaps the council itself does not, Elena agreed. But certain members do, and we have proof. The display changed again, showing communication logs and financial records that made several delegates turn pale. 3 of the current 12 species were themselves nearly sterilized, Elena revealed. The Cremori Dominion faced destruction 4,000 years ago until they offered mining rights to 17 resource-rich worlds in exchange for a revised threat assessment. Rexthal shot to his feet, his claws extending in fury. That is classified information? How did you obtain it? We've been watching for 800 years, Elena replied calmly. We have intercepted every communication, decoded every secret, and documented every crime this council has committed. She turned to address the chamber at large. 347 species have been exterminated under the doctrine of purity. 347 civilizations wiped from existence, and not one of them was actually a threat to galactic security. What are you saying? Asked Ambassador Nilsova of the Kethmari, her amphibious features rippling with nervous energy. I am saying that the doctrine of purity is not about protection, Elena answered. It is about control. It is about eliminating any species that might one day challenge the power of those who rule. She paused, letting her words sink in. The Kethmari know this better than most. Your people have been paying protection tributes for centuries, living in fear that the council might decide you are too dangerous to exist. Nilsova's ass widened in shock. How do you know about the tributes? Because we know everything, Elena said. We know about the secret payments. We know about the threats made against your homeworld, and we know that you are not alone. She gestured at the assembled delegates. How many of you live in fear? How many of you have paid bribes or made sacrifices to keep your species safe from sterilization? How many of you have wondered if your world might be next? The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates began shouting at each other, old grievances suddenly boiling to the surface. The Vrix Communion revealed that their homeworld had been threatened just 50 years ago. The Nil Thora hegemony admitted they had been paying secret tributes for millennia. Species that had been silent for thousands of years suddenly found their voices, speaking truths that had been buried in fear and shame. Enough! Methari roared, slamming her clawed hand against her throne. This is a council chamber, not a marketplace for gossip and conspiracy. I will have order. The chaos subsided, but the damage was done. The careful unity of the council had cracked, and through that crack poured 8 centuries of accumulated secrets. You have made your point, human, Methari said coldly. But evidence of corruption does not change the fundamental truth. Humanity was a threat, and we dealt with that threat. Did you? Elena asked. She gestured again, and the holographic display changed to show the massive structure humanity had built around the sun. We survived your extermination attempt. We grew stronger, and now we stand before you with the power to do to your worlds what you did to ours. The chamber fell silent. We have positioned stellar ignition devices near the home stars of every council species. Elena continued, and her voice was calm and cold. One signal from us and your suns will tear themselves apart. Your worlds will burn just as Earth burned, and your civilizations will end just as ours was supposed to end. Terror filled the chamber, pure, primal terror of the kind that no species had felt in thousands of years. But we are not here for revenge, Elena said. We could have been monsters. We chose to be lawyers, and we choose to give you something you never gave us, a chance. She looked up at the council, and in her eyes burned the fire of 8 billion murdered souls. The doctrine of purity must end. The sterilization protocols must be abolished, and this council must reform or be replaced. And if we refuse? Methari asked, though her voice had lost its commanding tone. Then we will leave, Elena replied. And the devices will remain, and you will spend the rest of your existence wondering when we might decide that justice requires a different approach. She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Vote, she commanded. Vote to end the doctrine of purity. Vote to acknowledge the crimes of the past and vote to build something better for the future. The council had never been commanded by anyone, but today they obeyed. The vote was taken, and one by one, the delegates chose survival over pride. The doctrine of purity died in that chamber, killed not by weapons, but by truth and the patient fury of those who refused to be forgotten. But as Elena watched the votes come in, she noticed Methari slip quietly away from her throne. The old Varelian was not defeated. She was making a call to someone, and Elena could guess who. The battle was won, but the war was not over. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient was waking up. The council chamber had barely begun to recover from the shock of the vote when the lights went out. Every system failed at once: communications, life support, gravity, plunging the vast hall into darkness and chaos. Delegates screamed as they floated upward from their seats, their bodies suddenly weightless in the artificial void. Elena remained calm, her feet still firmly planted on the speaking platform as the continuation analyzed what was happening. This was not a power failure. This was a demonstration of absolute control. And then the light returned, not the warm illumination of the council chambers, but something cold and terrible that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. At the center of the chamber, reality itself began to twist and fold. Space rippled like water, and something emerged from the distortion, a being that defied description. It was made of crystallized space-time, its form shifting constantly between shapes that hurt to look at directly. It radiated power that made the Council's greatest weapons seem like children's toys. The HFY, Elena whispered, and behind her eyes the continuation confirmed her fears. These were the hidden masters of the galaxy, the species that had achieved technological transcendence 2 million years ago and had been manipulating galactic civilization ever since. The humans had discovered references to them in the deepest, most encrypted council archives. The founders, some called them, the true rulers of everything. So, the HFY emissary said, and its voice resonated directly in the minds of everyone present. The failed extinction has grown clever. You have uncovered truths that were meant to stay buried. Elena stood tall and faced the impossible being without flinching. We have done more than uncover truths, she replied. We have evolved beyond what you expected, beyond what anyone expected. The HFY made a sound that might have been laughter. You think you are special? You are not the first species to survive a sterilization attempt. You are not even the 100th. But you are the first to make such a spectacle of your return. It drifted closer to Elena, its crystalline form pulsing with ancient light. We created the Council as a management system, the HFY continued. Every few million years, a species emerges that shows potential to one day challenge our supremacy, and the Council identifies them and eliminates them before they can become a threat. You have been culling the galaxy, Elena said. Killing civilizations before they can grow strong enough to oppose you. We've been maintaining order, the Axiori corrected. For 2 million years, we have ensured that no species rises to challenge the natural hierarchy, and we will continue to do so. It reached toward Elena with one shifting appendage. You have 2 choices. Human, accept elevation to our collective. Merge your consciousness with ours, and exist forever as part of something greater, or be reduced to quantum ash and forgotten like so many before you. The offer hung in the air, and the council delegates watched in terrified silence. This was no longer a matter of galactic law. This was a confrontation between gods and those who refused to kneel. Elena smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for 800 years. You assume, she said, that we can be reduced. You assume that we still exist in a form that can be destroyed by your methods. The Axiori's form flickered with what might have been surprise. Explain. During our 8 centuries of isolation, Elena continued, we did not simply rebuild, we evolved. We merged human consciousness with artificial intelligence, creating something new, something that exists partially outside normal spacetime. She tapped her temple. The continuation is not contained in bodies or machines. We are distributed across dimensions you have not yet discovered. We exist in the quantum foam. In the spaces between moments, in realms your 2 million years of advancement never taught you to perceive. The Axiori's form began to pulse faster. Impossible. No species achieves dimensional transcendence without our guidance. Humanity has always been impossible, Elena replied. That is what frightened you. That is why you tried to destroy us. You saw that we developed faster than any species in galactic history, and you knew that we would eventually surpass even you. The Axiori emissary lashed out, attempting to do what it had done to countless species before reaching into Elena's mind, to subsume her consciousness, to absorb her into its collective. But something went wrong. The moment it made contact with the continuation, it recoiled as if burned. What is this? It demanded, and for the first time in 2 million years, there was fear in its voice. We are chaos, Elena answered. We are creativity, we are stubbornness, we are everything you tried to destroy. Behind her eyes, 1 billion human souls sang in defiance. Every mind that had been uploaded, every consciousness that had been preserved, every fragment of human spirit that had survived the burning, they all pushed back against the Axiori's intrusion. The ancient being tried again, pouring more power into its attack, trying to force its way into the human collective and consume them from within. But human minds were not like other minds. They were too chaotic, too creative, too wildly individual to be absorbed. Where the Axiori found unity in other species, it found only glorious disorder in humanity. Every human mind thought differently, contradicted itself, changed its opinions and beliefs from moment to moment. They argued with each other even as they fought together. They dreamed impossible dreams and refused to accept any limitation. The Axiori could not consume them because there was nothing unified to consume, just an endless storm of individual consciousness that refused to be tamed. You made us into something new, Elena declared, advancing toward the ancient being as it flickered and wavered. Your murder attempt forced us to evolve. Your cruelty forged us into something stronger. And the thing about monsters? She stopped directly in front of the Axiori, her human eyes meeting its crystalline gaze without flinching. We do not stay under the bed. The Axiori emissary retreated, pulling back into its dimensional fold. This is not over, it hissed. We have ruled for 2 million years. We will not be overthrown by failed extinctions and chaotic minds. You will not be overthrown at all, Elena replied. We are not here to replace you. We are here to change the rules, and you can either adapt to the new galaxy we are building, or you can fade away into irrelevance. The ancient being stared at her for a long moment, and then it was gone, retreating back to whatever realm existed between galaxies, there to consider what had just happened. For the first time in 2 million years, the Axiori were uncertain. For the first time in 2 million years, they were worried. Elena turned back to face the council chamber, where the delegates were staring at her in shocked silence. "The founders are not gods," she told them. "They are just another species older and more powerful, but not invincible, and if they can be challenged, then so can every system of oppression they created." She looked up at the empty throne where Methori had sat. "The old order is broken. The question now is what we will build in its place." Ambassador Neil Sova of the Kethmari was the first to speak. "What do you propose?" she asked, and in her voice was something that had not existed in this chamber for thousands of years. "Hope." Elena smiled, and this time it was a warm smile, full of the compassion that had survived 8 centuries of darkness. "I propose we start by really talking about what kind of galaxy we want to live in." And for the first time in galactic history, the young species and the survivors and the oppressed began to dream of something better. The negotiations lasted 3 months, and they were the most difficult conversations in galactic history. Every species had grievances, centuries of oppression and fear that could not be erased overnight. The Kethmari demanded compensation for the tributes they had been forced to pay. The Vrix Communion wanted guarantees that their homeworld would never again be threatened. Even the old powers of the Council, humiliated and exposed, had concerns about their place in whatever new order emerged. Elena Vasquez-Chen sat through every meeting, listened to every argument, and spoke with patience that seemed impossible for a species that had been murdered. Behind her eyes, the continuation debated as fiercely as the delegates themselves. There were still those among humanity who wanted revenge, who believed that the Council species deserved to suffer as humanity had suffered. The stellar ignition devices remained in place, silent and patient, waiting for a signal that might never come. Every day, Elena felt the weight of that choice pressing down upon her. She remembered the burning, not as distant history, but as personal experience carried in the merged memories of the continuation. She remembered the sky catching fire and the screams of billions. She remembered the darkness of the bunkers and the cold fury of those who survived. Would justice be enough? Could anything be enough? On the final day of negotiations, the continuation held its greatest debate. The question was simple. What should humanity become? They had the power to dominate, to become the new rulers of the galaxy, replacing the Axiori as the hidden masters of everything. They could force the other species to obey their will, ensuring that no one would ever threaten humanity again. The vote was closer than anyone expected. Millions of merged minds argued for supremacy, for safety through absolute control. Millions of others argued for something harder, something that required trust in beings who had once tried to murder them. Elena cast the deciding vote. "We did not survive to become them," she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the continuation. "We survived to prove there is another way, a better way. And if we become tyrants, then everything we suffered means nothing." The debate ended. Humanity chose mercy over vengeance, justice over domination, and the galaxy changed forever. Elena stood before the assembled delegates one final time, presenting the document that would reshape civilization. "We call this the new compact," she announced. "It is not perfect, no agreement ever is, but it is a beginning." She began to read the principles that humanity proposed. First, the right of sanctuary. No pre-spacefaring species may be harmed. Period. Any species that threatens a developing civilization will face immediate response from all signatory powers. The delegates murmured their approval. Even the old powers could see the wisdom in this, knowing that they themselves might one day have been victims. Second, The transparency doctrine, all council proceedings, past and present, will become public record. There will be no more secrets, no more hidden crimes, no more shadows where evil can grow. This one caused more debate, but eventually it passed. The younger species demanded it, and the old powers had no choice but to accept. Third, the integration principle. Any species may join the council as equals, regardless of their age or technology level. No more hierarchy based on power, only cooperation based on mutual respect. Ambassador Nilsova wept openly at this, her amphibious tears falling freely as she realized what it meant for her people. And fourth, Elena continued, the human amendment. Any species facing extinction may request technological assistance from humanity. We will share what we have become, not through absorption, but through partnership. You would share your technology? Asked the Cremori ambassador, genuine shock in his voice. You would give others the power to challenge you. We would give others the power to survive, Elena corrected. We will not make the same mistakes that were made against us. We will not allow fear of potential threats to justify murder. The vote was taken. One by one, species that had lived in fear for millennia raised their voices in favor of the new compact. The Kethmari voted yes with joy. The Vrix communion voted yes with relief. Even the Cremori Dominion, humbled by the exposure of their ancient crimes, voted yes with something like hope. Only Mithari, returned to her throne but stripped of her authority, voted against, and her lonely descent was recorded for history as a reminder of what the galaxy was leaving behind. The new compact became law, and the galaxy began to change. In the months that followed, humanity kept its promises. The stellar ignition devices were deactivated and eventually removed, not because they were no longer needed, but because trust had to start somewhere. Human ambassadors traveled to every corner of the galaxy, meeting with species that had hidden in fear for generations and offering them friendship instead of threats. Technology was shared, not weapons, but tools for healing and building and growing. And in the Sol system, humanity constructed one final monument. It was a station that orbited the great structure they had built around the sun, a place of remembrance and reflection. On its walls were carved the names of every species the Council had exterminated, 347 civilizations, each one listed in their own language, their symbols burning eternally in captured starlight. At the center of the station was a simple chamber where visitors could sit in silence and remember. 50 years after the new compact was signed, a young Kethmari diplomat came to visit the memorial. Her name was Nilthara, and she was the granddaughter of Ambassador Nilsova, who had wept with joy when the integration principle was announced. Nilthara had grown up in a galaxy transformed, a galaxy where her people walked as equals among the stars, where no one lived in fear of extermination, where cooperation had replaced domination. She found Elena waiting for her in the memorial chamber. The human woman looked the same as she had 50 years ago, still young and strong, her consciousness distributed across 1,000 platforms, but choosing to appear in this single form for their meeting. "Thank you for seeing me," Nilthara said. "I wanted to ask you something I have wondered about since I was a child." "Ask," Elena replied, her voice warm and gentle. Nilthara looked at the names carved into the walls. 347. Species who would never know that someone had finally spoken for them. "Why did you not destroy them?" she asked. "The council species, after what they did to you. After what they did to all these others, you had every right to burn their worlds and make them pay." Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "We thought about it," she admitted. "For 800 years, we thought about little else. The anger was always there, always burning, always demanding satisfaction." She walked to the wall and touched one of the carved names, a species called the Velinari, who had been painters and poets before they were reduced to ash. "But revenge would have made us feel better for a moment," she continued. "Just a moment, and then what? we would have become exactly what we hated. We would have proven that the Council was right to fear us. She turned back to face Nelthara. Justice will make the galaxy better forever. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And we learn to be patient. Nelthara nodded slowly, understanding filling her young eyes. The children in our schools learn about what you called the human precedent, she said. The legal principle that no species exists at the sufferance of another. It is the foundation of everything we are building. Then the suffering was not meaningless, Elena replied. Then the dead are not forgotten. She smiled, and in that smile was the weight of 8 centuries and the hope of eternity. That is all we ever wanted to be remembered, and to make sure it never happens again. The two of them stood together in silence, surrounded by the names of the lost, and outside the memorial station the galaxy turned slowly onward. New civilizations were rising on distant worlds, their fires burning bright against the darkness. Species that had hidden in fear were building ships and reaching for the stars. And somewhere in the void between galaxies, the Axiori watched. They had ruled for 2 million years. They were patient. They could wait. But for the first time in their ancient existence, they were not certain of what would come next. Humanity had changed everything, not through weapons or conquest, but through something far more dangerous. They had given the galaxy hope. And hope, as the Axiori were learning, was the most powerful force in the universe. It could not be conquered. It could not be exterminated. It could only be answered with more hope or with fear. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see which the founders would choose. But humanity did not wait. Humanity never waited. Humanity built and dreamed and reached for the stars. And that, in the end, was what made them human.